People are like, man, I just don't know about the charging and how far I can go and all those things that people have, faults about. We want to make sure that our infrastructure is up as much as humanly possible.
EVs are more powerful, more practical, and more cost-effective than you think. And they're also driving economic growth in Alabama. In these episodes, we're talking to some of the brightest leaders in the industry. And we're covering everything from infrastructure advancements to benefits and incentives for people like you. Hello. Thank you for joining us for the Drive Electric Alabama podcast, where we plug you in to everything you need to know about electric vehicles, also known as EVs, in the state of Alabama. This podcast is brought to you by Alabama Power's You're in Charge EV incentive programs. To learn more about these programs, go to alabamapower.com/EV. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Staley. I'm also president of the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition. In today's episode, we're delving into the world of EV-related workforce development. Workforce development enabled Alabama to attract automakers that are manufacturing nearly 1 million cars per year in our state. Now that Alabama automakers are making EVs, EV-related workforce development and upskilling is essential to prepare more workers for well-paying jobs. All of that will help Alabama remain competitive as a top automotive manufacturing state as the industry transitions full scale into electric vehicles. Now, today we have two guests from Alabama Power who bring a wealth of experience in shaping the future of EVs through strategic workforce initiatives. So let's welcome Tom McNeil, who's Workforce Development Program Manager, and Jim Fugate, the Energy Infrastructure Training and Technical Training Manager. Thanks for joining the show today, guys.
Thanks for having us, Michael.
So let's dive right in. And Jim, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what do you do as the Energy Infrastructure Training and Technical Training Manager at Alabama Power?
It's a big, long name just to say that I'm helping align training, technical training specifically, in the areas of energy infrastructure. So one of my main opportunities that has come up has been to look for cornerstone programs, training programs, that we could roll out across the state. And the method of doing that is in a partnership with the ACCS, Alabama Community College System. So we're working with them to roll out training that affects the energy infrastructure across the state. And one of these areas of responsibility is in electric vehicles. We've been looking at cornerstone programs, training that would help somebody learn the basics and the elements that go into electric vehicles. That's not just the electric vehicle, how it functions, the battery system, how to repair them, also how to install and maintain the charging system, again, the energy infrastructure that will be rolled out across the state. So one of my main things there is to make sure that this training is not only valuable to the state, but it's also consistently taught across the state.
So Jim, when I hear you say community college system and training, are you talking about developing like programs that last 2 or 4 years and like curriculum for students, or are you talking about like more specialized training? What kind of partnership is that with the community colleges? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, to make a big impact and make it very quickly, you can't do that as well in a 2 or 4 year program. Not that these elements can't be taught in those programs, they will be. But the quickest way to make an impact and to get the workforce trained is in what we call workforce training. So we're talking about short courses that are driven specifically in a certain area. Let's say an auto mechanic that wants to learn how to work on an electric vehicle. The electric vehicle systems are quite a bit different than a normal auto. So there are cornerstone elements or things that they need to learn. Let's say what we call a high voltage in an electric vehicle, 300 volt system that they're running off of. Some of them are going much higher than that, but let's just say a basic 300 volt system, an auto mechanic hasn't been trained in that area. So these cornerstone programs will teach them how to function and do troubleshooting and repair on electric vehicles. So that's what we say. We would be able to do that in a very, very fast and cost-effective method by being weeks of training, not years or months of training.
So to recap, you're really saying everybody gets this cornerstone training, basic electrical skills and how to work with electricity, and then you're developing that second pathway too so they can get more specialized training down to the individual skill level.
Absolutely, yeah. The cornerstone is just the safety and the physics of how things work, how the battery systems charge. They're all very similar in the way they charge batteries, and the batteries themselves, even though they're different manufacturers, battery charging is done in a similar manner. We've identified cornerstone program that will help everyone learn, and then we're already looking at the level 2, level 3 programs that stack on top of that to teach the more specific elements in repairing these specific electric vehicles.
Fascinating. So, Tom, let's go to you for a moment. And as workforce development program manager, what are you looking for in a workforce development initiative that makes you, as a professional in that field, think it's a good one?
Great question, Michael, and thanks again for having me today. Really, the bottom line is this: for any program in any state across the country, it either is going to connect people to employment or it's going to connect them to better employment. If we're not doing that, honestly, we're just training for the sake of training, or we're recruiting people into programs for the sake of recruiting, and there's really not an end goal being met.
And I guess the kind of thing would be, you obviously want a charging station to work, or if somebody shows up at one, you want to be giving the right kind of training. What about the cost? It can be really expensive to get training in different specialty areas, can't it?
It can. And Michael, to your point is, at the end of the day, when we're talking about, chargers, right, they got to be up, they got to be available, things are working. And some people think, well, you just stick one over at the, wherever retail store or whatever it might be, and you just plug it in the wall. It's a lot more complicated than that, right? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, as far as ensuring standardization and safety and things. But you're right. In today's world, people can go online, they'll see lots of different trainings and such. And to your point is, hey, what's that affordability? Is it expensive? What's happening in that case? And so for me, at the end of the day, as a citizen of the state, I always want to make sure that if people are getting training, right, that it is affordable, it is directly connected to your point earlier, is that people have an opportunity to get a job. I think about, if they're working full time, they got family, they have other things. I mean, how do we do this the right way? And so the thing I love about this is that our state leaders have really, really stepped it up in this energy infrastructure space, and more specifically, like Jim was talking about, in the EV space. So, if we think about that, is we want to help Alabamians who are doing this work, and Jim will kind of talk a little bit about this, electricians, and how do we get them upskilled? And I'm speaking specifically about the chargers you kind of mentioned, Michael, having them ready and available, trained safely to be able to do this work across the state. And I know you'll talk a little bit about NEVI funding and projects and how that kind of stuff works. But again, Alabama has really, really stepped up. So kudos to ADECA, Director Boswell, and his team for their leadership when it comes to the work in this space. And we'll talk a little bit later about EVITP and some of the things that we're doing there, but we basically got that down to low to no cost for these people to get that training.
So, Tom, as a workforce development professional, when you look at what Alabama's doing, and you mentioned ADECA, the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs. And for listeners, that is the state agency that administers the electric vehicle charging grants in the state. And we've had Director Boswell as a guest, and he talked all about those programs. But from your perspective as a workforce development professional, what do you see in that program that you think puts a feather in Alabama's cap, or that we should be proud of as a state?
Yeah. Well, one, I think Alabama continues to be a front runner in making sure that Alabama is at the top of the list of auto manufacturing states. The thing that I was so excited about to see, and again, a lot of important people made this happen, is that Alabama has created a separate category of NEVI projects, to your point, dedicated to workforce upskilling for people installing and maintaining EV charging infrastructure.
So kudos to the state for that, and thank you for sharing that information. So we see exponential growth of the EV industry, and it's reshaping the automotive landscape. We've talked about getting people trained and trying to do it affordably for the worker that's being upskilled. So let's dive deeper in on the specific types of training beyond that cornerstone training that Jim has already talked about. Jim, what are the specific types of skills and knowledge that workers need to be successful working in the EV space? And how do we avoid troubled waters? Or how do we avoid problems?
I'm glad you asked it just that way, because I think that word, the troubled waters, calls us back to the cornerstone training. I think that's exactly how we do that. We don't just run out there and give them a bunch of skills that they don't understand what they're doing. They're not just following a prescribed set of tasks. They're actually learning the skill set. So after they've mastered that ability to work with electricity, that's really the skill set that we want to make sure they have. They need some more specific skills and understanding related to electric vehicles. People who need this type of training, we'd be talking about automobile manufactured workers, EV charger installers, maintenance technicians, auto mechanics who would work at, let's say, a mom and pop service station, and first responders who may come in contact with this EV during the course of their work. One case in point here, the state just announced a huge robotics training center that will upskill the auto manufacturing workforce. And Tom talked a little bit about the charger installation and maintenance workforce, where the Alabama has established itself as a leader on the national stage. I think that's something we can be very proud of.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And, on the first responders at the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition, every year we have at least one or two opportunities for first responders to be trained about how they respond to an incident with an electric vehicle. And the registrations come in faster than almost anything else we do. And that's because we have so many first responders, and there's so many different areas where they need to be trained, from being a police officer, a firefighter, a paramedic, someone who's driving a tow truck or operating a scrapyard. And we're glad to see that state leaders are also thinking about that, and the fire service and the first responders and the emergency managers understand it's an area that needs attention. And so we know we're going to make progress in that area, just like we are in all these other areas that we're talking about. So, Tom, I'd like to turn to you and look a little bit deeper at this charger installation and maintenance discussion. I think because it's so important that the chargers work when they're in the ground and that they're operating and we can keep them operating. So to dive in deeper on that, can you tell us a little bit more about this EVITP program and what's it all about and what's it mean?
Absolutely. So EVITP stands for the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program. Really, the program, it gives an electrician, like Jim talks about, you got somebody who's an electrician, a basic certification to properly install a high-powered EV charger. And so if you think about, well, how did EVITP even get developed? Well, years ago, it's the wild, wild west. You got a lot of different charger companies and other things. So how do you put in a standard, a national standard that makes sense, safety at the forefront of the person installing the charger and the safe use of that charger after installation? And so several groups came together, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers being one, because they're very involved in that across, thousands of contractors across the country working and installing things. And so they were a big part of that. Safety is their mantra. And so what's awesome about this is that the federal government then took that standard, it was so good, and made it the minimum standard for anybody installing chargers that get any kind of support, federal funding to do so. And the state of Alabama followed suit with that. And so it's just the right thing to do. So it's a 20-hour course. A lot of people are going to be taking that over the coming years.
Well, Tom, I can say that in the process of helping the state plan in our EV advisory group that we're involved with, the Alabama EV Advisory Group, the role that you and your colleagues played in helping us to evaluate that and understand and let all the stakeholders understand that having this standard for training is important for safety. It's also important for the proper operation of the chargers. So thank you for your work and helping to make it a solid program. And I know that this EVITP is a federal requirement, and the state has decided to and also have that requirement for state-funded projects. So it'll be consistent across the board. And that's another thing that is a good element of a program. So when we talk about the EVITP as a minimum standard, what would be the next step after EVITP that someone could get even more specialized training? And is that even important?
A great question, Michael. And let me say this, and as far as EVITP, for the people listening today, they could say, wow, I'm an electrician, I'd like to be a part of that, or I'm an electrical contractor, I want to get my team trained up to be able to do this. What's that going to cost? And so what's nice about this is the Construction Industry Craft Training Board, in which I sit on, absolutely has the opportunity now to provide reimbursement to those contractors that send people through that EVITP training. I mean, it's only a few $100 anyway, but at the end of the day, though, they can pay for their folks to come through that and then get reimbursed. Obviously, there's some things in the state guidelines that you all have published on how to do that. But definitely, again, as we mentioned earlier, let's try to keep that low to no cost for our folks here in the state, and there's different opportunities and mechanisms to do that. But to answer your main question there, Michael, is, they get the EVITP, it's 20 hours, that's great and all, but how do we take that to the next level? Well, it's really around Jim's cornerstone programs. It's not only do we install them correctly, but how do we keep them maintained so when you are making the trips or, people are like, man, I just don't know about the charging and how far I can go and all those things that people have, faults about. We want to make sure that our infrastructure is up as much as humanly possible. And so that's where Jim and his team have done really a great job on this next level on that. So if a charger does go down, we know it's going to happen. Something's going to happen, right? And but how does that get back up as soon as humanly possible?
Well, and I guess if you think about it, there's so many different brands and manufacturers of charging infrastructure. So I guess you need people that are trained for each particular brand. Tom, you mentioned the NEVI and the ADECA plan, and I just want to break in for a second and say that people can go to, it's ADECA, ADECA, it's the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs, adeca.alabama.gov/EV, and you can then see more information about the state programs. You can read the NEVI plan, which is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, that is expected to send about $80 million to Alabama for EV charging along travel corridors over the coming years. That infrastructure plan is required to be submitted by the state every year. So people that are really interested in this topic can see, and I want to add another comment, Tom. So the Construction Industries Craft Training Board stepped up and said for contractors, they will provide this training for the EV ITP. We also are very happy that we talked with Alabama Rural Electric Association of Cooperatives, and they confirmed they also have avenues for their electrical workers, and the Alabama Municipal Electric Authority confirmed they have avenues to pay for that training for their workers that are installing these chargers. So really, that's a great thing, because anybody who's an electrical worker in the state that wants to get into this market of installing EV charging, you have a way to get that necessary minimum certification or requirement satisfied without expense, except for the time you put into taking the training.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So again, it's a very strategic plan by our state and partners within our state, again, to make this as easy as possible on our contractors and our electricians across the state to make sure that we get this infrastructure installed and always consistently maintained and up and running.
The Drive Electric Alabama podcast is brought to you by Alabama Power's Home Charging Rebate Program. You can get a $500 rebate when you purchase and install a Level 2 charger at your home. If you want to know more, check the show notes or go to alabamapower.com/EV. Now, back to the discussion. So Alabama has always been a top auto producing state. I hope that continues. And as the workforce development needs around that continue to evolve, we want to keep being successful in this arena as a state where we're providing a workforce that can meet the automotive manufacturing needs of our state, but also the maintenance. When we talk about electric vehicles, we think of on-road cars, consumers are driving, but the industry is also expanding into bigger, heavier, and other types of EVs, off-road vehicles, and the like. So, Jim, what do we need to do as a state to be prepared with our workforce when we have those bigger vehicles, those bigger charging needs, and huge infrastructure that's electric?
Yeah, as I had said earlier, we've got a cornerstone program that we'll be teaching. So that cornerstone program in the EV area will also align workers to work on larger vehicle. There's been a lot of talk in the news lately about tractor trailers and their manufacturers making them. They're not commonplace yet, but that's coming. There are also a big push for off-road electric vehicles. We're talking about skid steers and that type of equipment. So just know that's coming. So we're not just sitting back and waiting for it to happen. We're going ahead and we're developing that training as well. There's going to be a large need for a workforce that can maintain and repair those vehicles, just like with the automotive, the people are personal vehicles that they're driving on the road.
Now it's time for a segment where we separate fact from fiction when it comes to EVs. And it's brought to you by the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition. There's a myth out there that says your electricity bill will go through the roof if you have an EV. But the truth is, the average customer will see an increase of about $20 to $40 per month on their power bill. However, they will no longer have a monthly gasoline expenditure for a car. That's significant overall savings because, according to J.D. Power, the average American spends $150 to $200 a month on gas. Finally, here's an EV savings hack. Check with your electric utility company to see if they offer a discounted charging rate. All right, let's get back to the conversation. So Jim and Tom, as we wrap up and conclude the episode, I want to say thanks for coming on. There are probably listeners who will want to know more about the things you've talked about. So when it's EV-related training, where should people that are listening go to get more information about what we've been talking about today?
Well, for me, if anybody's wanting to know more about the Cornerstone training or additional types of training that we've talked about today, they could just reach out to me.
We'll add Jim's contact information to the show notes, so anybody who's listening can get that information from there. Well, Tom, for anyone who wants to learn more about EVITP or how they can get the training paid for like we talked about, we'll put the information in our show notes. But what should they do, Tom? Where could they go?
Absolutely. So the website for EVITP, very simple. It's evitp.org. It gives an overview of the training, the credentials and such that it takes. You know, I'm an HR guy, workforce guy, so I can't go and take the training because I don't meet the minimum standards. So all of that's listed out on there, the cost and such. Again, if you're an electrical contractor out there, local labor union, you've got people under your tutelage that you want to get trained, then there's a way to go to the Alabama Construction Industry Craft Training Board. You can reach out to the staff and they can talk to you about how you submit for a reimbursement grant for that training for your folks. And again, we want to make it just as easy as possible for our workforce in Alabama to get that initial 20-hour training to be able to install those chargers.
So for all the listeners, just look at our show notes and you'll find all the links to all the acronyms and websites that we've talked about today. So don't try to scribble it down. Just look at the show notes. So I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to provide us with some closing thoughts and just kind of to recap our conversation. What would you like to leave the listeners with today, Jim?
You know, one of many things we didn't discuss, range concerns and the anxiety around that. Most people that are looking at purchasing an electric vehicle, that's one of the big things they talk about. The way that we're going to address that is that currently we're using federal monies, assisting people in finding that, and using these programs to train people across the state on these chargers, not just how to install them correctly, but how to maintain them. We're using that opportunity. There's another big point here is battery longevity. I've had that conversation with countless people. The batteries can be repaired. So we're addressing that through training, and we're training into the basis of the program on the electric vehicle maintenance on how to identify a failed battery. And then we're also adding on or stacking on a program on top of all that will teach someone how to repair actual failed batteries. That will give, let's say, the mom and pop shops we referred to earlier, a new revenue stream. They would have the ability to go in and bring someone's electric vehicle in and not only troubleshoot it down to find that the battery is failed, they could repair that battery. So you're looking at giving the consumer an opportunity to get a failed battery repaired for hundreds of dollars rather than in some cases 15, 20,000 or more for a replaced battery. Now that's fine when they're under warranty. You'll go back to the manufacturer and they'll replace the battery. But a failed battery, when it's out of warranty, you're not going to reinvest $28,000 into a car that you already own just to repair the battery. We are addressing that problem by training, proper training.
Well, I love how the work that you do makes EV ownership not only more affordable for consumers, it also creates business opportunities for mom and pop shops and mechanics and electrical workers and electricians. So thank you so much for being on today. And so, Tom, what are your closing thoughts?
Well, Michael, I'm just excited about the strategic plan that's been put in place here in Alabama. You know, if I think about from the governor to the legislature to Director Boswell with ADECA, you know, it was very thoughtful in what they're put in place. And again, you look at it and, you know, we're the only state really putting in that workforce component. And we know that other people are going to follow after that. But I just love that we're being very strategic and we are putting in place an opportunity to train and upskill our workers, our Alabama citizens who are here to do the work here in Alabama to build out the infrastructure. So again, I'm just super excited about the plan that's been put in place.
Well, I just want to give a big thanks to both of you, Jim and Tom, for coming on today to share your insights, expert insights on workforce development in the EV world. And to the listeners that are joining us on this journey, we're glad you're listening.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the next episode, we're going to get an EV perspective from automobile dealers and automobile manufacturers. My co-host, Cedric Daniels, will be speaking with Mitchell Watts, Vice President and co-owner of Town & Country Ford in Alabama. He'll also talk to Ron Davis, President and Chairman of the Board of the Alabama Automotive Manufacturers Association. Stay tuned, and we hope to see you then. The Drive Electric Alabama podcast is brought to you by Alabama Power's You're in Charge EV programs, as well as the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition. The series is co-hosted by me, Michael Staley, and Cedric Daniels, and the podcast is produced by Ingredient. For more information, you can always check the show notes or go to alabamapower.com/EV. Thanks for listening.